Rachel Mealer with the University of Wyoming Cooperative Extension Service.
And I'm Dallas Mount, also with UW Extension. We're here today to talk to you about how to determine when it's time to reseed and when you don't need to bother reseeding. When you look at a piece of land that's dry land ground that doesn't have irrigation water, maybe it's rangeland, maybe it's a place where you just built a house and did some ground disturbance. One of the main questions is, what do I do to reseed my ground, to get grasses growing back there? Well, sometimes reseeding is what you need to do, but oftentimes, maybe if you just wait some time, the plant population that you want to have there will eventually come in. So I guess one of the first questions to ask yourself is, what are your long-term goals for the piece of ground? Do you want to have the most productive forage land for grazing animals, or do you just want some vegetative cover to hold the soil and to provide some ground cover year in, year out?
For this particular location, Dallas has told me the goals for this area is more just to get ground cover, and they're not concerned about high production or even type of species. They don't necessarily need native perennial species in this area. They just need something to hold the soil and to fill in the gaps.
Well, and really to outcompete the weeds. If you've got a weed problem, then what you have is a bare ground problem. Something's not growing there, so that weed is. So what can we plant here, or what kind of actions do we need to take to encourage these plants that we want to see come in, fill in these bare ground areas and outcompete with these weeds? So the first thing to do is to look down at the ground, get down close here, and do an assessment of what type of plants you have on the ground. What we're looking at now is cheatgrass that's mature and that's gone dormant, and that's an annual plant, so it grows from seed and then dies out that year and produces more seed. Really, that's just an indicator of bare ground. I've also got some other annual weeds like kochia. I've got some bindweed that's a perennial weed that invades bare ground. And then I've got a perennial plant here. This is a grass. A perennial plant is a plant that comes back year after year after year. So I've got a grass here called sand dropseed. Not an extremely desirable grass, but it's holding the soil and it's providing some competition against the weeds. So as I look at this place here, I've got a couple of small perennial plants and then a lot of area of bare ground. So from what I'm seeing, this might be a candidate for reseeding, but we need to look around some more and assess this ground further to see if more of it's like this, or if other places we have more grasses and less bare ground and less weeds. So let's go somewhere else and take another look.
So as Dallas talked about, perennial species versus annual species is something that we want to pay attention to. Maybe one question we ask ourselves is, how do I tell? By just glancing at it, it might be kind of hard if you don't know what species are which. But an easy way to go about determining if it's an annual versus a perennial is just reaching down there and grabbing the species. If this plant comes up pretty easily, as you can see, their root system are very, very small and comes up. This ground really isn't even that wet, and it came up without too much trouble. This is an annual species. So a lot of the majority of its work goes into promoting seeds and having seeds to reproduce itself. Now, a perennial species won't be so easy. We can tug at this one, and it's hard. In fact, when I pull it, we don't even really get a root system. This is that annual again. We're not getting much of that root system, which is telling me that it's a perennial species.
So now we're at a spot just a few feet away from the other spot we were at that had a lot of bare ground and annual weeds. Look down here. What are we seeing? A lot more perennial grasses and a lot fewer places with bare ground and annual weeds. Yes, they're still here, but I'm seeing an increase in these grasses that are perennial grasses that are starting to fill in these bare ground areas. So this is telling me, hey, give it some time. It's going to fill in by itself. Maybe we don't need to reseed this area. Well, Rachel, I think one thing that's often overlooked in a reseeding project is the amount of money and the time that it takes, and sometimes the fact that there's a high level of failure when doing a rangeland or a dryland reclamation on a site like this.
I agree. There's a thought that it's a one-time shot, that once you reseed, that you're just going to get this great stand of perennial grasses, and sometimes that's not the case. You have to have the right temperatures, the right amount of moisture at the correct time of year to really get that grass established and going. Not to mention the seed bed preparation. You have to have good soil to seed contact for that seed to even have a chance to get started. So there's a lot more complexity involved to reseeding than just putting the seed out there and praying for rain.
I've looked at some budgets and some numbers on doing some reclamation projects, and probably the cheapest way to do it you're probably going to have about $100 an acre invested by the time you're done. With if you do a chemical type of treatment like Roundup and then seed behind that, you're going to have money in your seed, money in your chemical, money in your application. It's going to cost money to either rent or use your own drill to put the seed on the ground. And then it's going to take a lot of time and some deferment of use. Usually we look at least 2 years, 2 growing seasons, where those plants are starting to be established and you really want to stay off of it. Don't do any grazing to it and those types of things. So it's a huge investment to do either a renovation or a reclamation project. So I think the thing I'd like to emphasize is if you don't have to reclaim a piece of ground, whatever your goals are for that, the more you can let nature manage it and work with nature to get the types of plants that you want, the cheaper it's going to be, and maybe the better off your project will be in the end.
I agree. I think one thing you really have to keep in mind is patience. An area is not going to change overnight, especially an upland site like this. An irrigated area with water being available at numerous times throughout the year is definitely a very different situation than an upland situation such as this. So you got to have patience, and seeds can remain viable within that soil for years. And so just waiting on those, they may come back and surprise you if you have a good spring moisture.
So if you've got a piece of ground that you're thinking about reseeding, first thing to do is go out there, get down on your hands and knees, look down at the ground, see what kinds of plants you've already got there. Maybe you've got those plants and they just need some time and TLC to get established and outcompete those weeds that are causing you problems, and it'll take care of itself. But perhaps you don't. Maybe you've got a big area of bare ground, or you've got plants that are just undesirable, or your goals are high production and you need some different types of species of grass to do that, and you will be looking at a reseeding project. But either way, go out there and study your site, figure out what you want it to be and how you want to get it there. Contact your local extension office or conservation district office if you need some help.